look, after what I've been through.
Okay, we're live. This is Senate Transportation Committee. It's Wednesday, February 28th. And we're going to be starting off with the Transportation Research Center. Those witnesses joining us remotely. So when they're joined, there's Gregory.
Hey. Where's that located? At UVM?
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, Dr. Roengold, you could introduce yourselves and take it from here.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for inviting us to talk to you this morning. So I'm Dr. Greg Roengold. I'm the director of the UVM Transportation Research Center and an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at UVM. And I'm joined here today with Claire Nelson, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Claire Nelson. I'm a graduate researcher in the UVM Transportation Research Center, and I'm pursuing my MS in Civil and Environmental Engineering, also at UVM.
Great. Senator,
can I just jump in really quick and see, did you have any research into the new logo that I'm hearing so much about right now?
You know, I only learned about that yesterday when I saw it on the news. So.
It's the UVM logo? Yeah, I didn't hear it.
Sorry.
Like the old one
Did you get the civil engineers involved?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no comment.
Maybe we could have a bill in the Senate. So we'll fix it. Don't you worry about that.
That's so funny. I hadn't heard of that either. Great. Is there a way that I could share my screen so that we could share a PowerPoint?
Yes, there is a way.
Yes, I just made her the cups.
Cool. And yeah,
Okay,
so
perfect.
What we have planned for today is we have some slides on research that Claire and I have been doing, and really it's Claire that's been doing most of the work. So she'll talk about it, but we'll be discussing some of our work on mileage, base fees, and if we get through that, we also have some work in progress on a greenhouse gas vehicle emission tracking data dashboard we've been developing with CCRPC that we can share. And we'll pause after the mileage fee section so we can discuss that, answer any questions. And then if after that there's still time, we can look at the dashboard. And we're hoping to go that shouldn't be too long, so we can also discuss anything else that you might want to discuss. So.
Okay, yeah, we have till 9:30, and Dr. Roengold, can you give us just a quick introduction to what the Research Center does?
Yep, those are our first slide or two.
Okay.
Let's see, hopefully this works. Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah. We can.
Yes.
Great.
Cool. All right, so overview of the TRC. We were established in 2006 with a big grant from USDOT. This is part of USDOT's University Transportation Centers program. We're located in the College of Engineering and Mathematical Sciences, but we've had a relationship between UVM and the College of Engineering and VTrans for 40 plus years. So even before we were called the center, we had been doing research for the state. There's about 8 core faculty and research staff, plus there's additional part-time affiliated researchers from across campus. We don't have any curriculum or teaching. It's a research center that's largely externally funded through contracts and grants. But we hire lots of undergraduate, master's, and PhD students to assist with the research, like Claire, who will be presenting some of her work today. So we're involved in education, in that sense of providing research opportunities for current students, and also workforce development. We're also under or within the TRC, there are several other centers. The National Center for Sustainable Transportation, that is our current USDOT Transportation, University Transportation Research Center. It's a partnership with the University of California, Davis, the University of Southern California, Cal State Long Beach, Texas Southern, and Georgia Tech. And it's just been renewed for the third time with the group of people, and these are five-year grants. We're also partners with the University of Maine in the Transportation Infrastructure Durability Center, which is another UTC program from USDOT. It's a regional UTC for the New England region focused on infrastructure durability. We are also home to the USDOT Department of Energy Vermont Clean Cities Coalition, which is an outreach-focused effort that where we're help communities, businesses, municipalities with questions around reducing the emissions and energy use of their vehicle fleets. And we also have we also operate the Northeast Transportation Workforce Center. The funding for that just ended, but there's an effort at USDOT to provide more funding to continue that program as well. And the center, so our focus is really on two things. We're here to serve the state and be a resource for transportation-related research that any municipality, county, the state, VTrans, other agencies might have. And nationally, our focus is really being building a center with expertise on small and rural communities and all the complex questions around transportation and sustainability and economic development, all those things that are related to that. And our current research areas are around alternative multimodal transportation, energy, emissions, various types of environmental analysis and modeling, equity, and travel behavior analysis. And when I say equity, it's both thinking about, across socioeconomic groups, think about, and also geographic. So thinking about equity in terms of urban, rural, suburban, different communities and the challenges they face. We do a lot of work with safety and infrastructure maintenance. And we also think about communities as a whole and land use and the interactions between community development, land use, and transportation. We have active research in all those areas right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greg, you ready for me to dive into my research? That's good. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some work I've done over the past couple of years, exploring how we fund transportation systems in the United States. And we've primarily been focusing on the state of Vermont, partially because we're located here, and partially because we have access to the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles registration and inspection records. So we've been able to utilize those to have this pretty granular understanding of how much Vermonters are consuming fuel, electricity, how far they're driving, things like that. And we've been able to do this pretty granular analysis of how much people would pay under different fee scenarios. But before I dive into that specific research, I just wanted to cover these in my research over the past couple of years. I've kind of identified these 6 main criteria for any alternative funding source for our transportation systems. And some of these might seem really obvious too, but it's revenue generating ability, it's public and political support, so it's ability to get passed and implemented successfully, it's technical feasibility, the equity of the program, its ability to charge all users of the road. That's something we've seen with the gas tax, struggling with electric vehicles, and then also whether or not, let's see, my thing is covering this last one, the administrative costs of any additional program. So what we've done in the past couple of years is pretty directly research these first 4 key areas, and that's what I'll be sharing with you today. And these last 2 areas are currently in need of more evaluation, but we have some thoughts on that I'll share at the end as well. So the first paper that I'm going to be discussing came out of state interest in charging EVs for their use of the roadway. So the state was considering, I believe, 3 alternatives: a mileage fee, a flat fee, or a kilowatt per hour fee. And what we did is we utilized our access to the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles data to assess how much Vermonters would pay under a hypothetical revenue neutral mileage fee and how much they'd pay under a hypothetical flat fee. And we did this, we had data for almost 200,000 real Vermont households. So this is like real vehicle data from the year 2019. And what we wanted to do is see how these changes in costs, if we were to switch away from a gas tax to a flat fee for households or away from a gas tax to a mileage fee, what that would mean for people in rural areas. Are they going to see higher costs on average, lower costs? And also what that would mean across income groups. And I'll preface this with that we've completed this research. This paper is published and citable if that's of interest to anybody in the room. And kind of our big takeaways here are that flat fees will generally result in much more extreme cost variations for Vermont households. So on average, you're going to be seeing people paying up to $50 more a year to $100 more a year, or $50 less to $100 less. So just much more extreme cost variations. With mileage fees, you see much more minimal cost variations. Most households would only see on average a $10 a year difference in how much they're paying. We also find with both of these fees, rural households would be more likely to save money on average than their higher income counterparts, which is contrary to the popular conception that rural households would have to pay more under either of these fees. And we also, when we looked across income groups, we found that mileage fees will generally save low income households more money. Flat fees, on the other hand, are slightly more regressive than the gas tax. It doesn't have that income fluctuation because it's just a flat fee. So the kind of takeaway there is that mileage fees are generally going to save money for people in rural households and people in low income households. And it's slightly more progressive than the gas tax, or less regressive than the gas tax.
Claire?
I have a question. Can you explain a little bit more what you have for data source relative to the saving rural and low income households? Usually rural think of as having greater mileage because there's much more travel involved to get to work, to get to services, etc. So you said that's contrary to perception. And so, could you give us a bit more detail around how you
Absolutely.
What you had for information or data to arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, so we calculated how much each household is currently spending in gas taxes based on their fuel consumption. So people in the kind of overall answer here is that people in rural areas tend to own slightly less efficient vehicles. And so when you switch away from the gas tax, which slightly incorporates fuel economy into how much you're paying, to a straight mileage fee, they're actually going to see cost reductions every year. Their overall cost is still going to be greater than people in rural areas because of that higher mileage thing that you're mentioning. But their relative cost relative to what they're currently paying, they're actually going to see savings. Does that answer your question?
It was based on the vehicle that they're driving. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yes. So we have data from the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. We have the registration data, which has the mailing address of any vehicles registered in the state of Vermont. And we've been able to link that with inspection data from vehicles, which at an annual vehicle inspection, your odometer reading is written down. So by looking at subsequent years of inspections, you can calculate how far that vehicle traveled across that time. So we were able to combine how far a vehicle has traveled with its mailing address to give it like a mileage located in space. And then other information that we have from those records are the vehicle identification numbers, which the Transportation Research Center has done some really great work to decode so that we can pull out information like its fuel economy, number of axles, number of doors, things, all these things that we can link to add in a fuel economy. So basically for every vehicle registered in Vermont, we've been able to identify how far it's traveled in any given year, where it's located in space, and some of the vehicle attributes like the fuel economy. So all those things together allowed us to calculate how much each of these vehicles is, how much fuel they're consuming, how many miles they've traveled, and translate that into what it would mean for gas tax costs.
It'd be interesting to see the data because, you know, we've been told a lot of particularly lower income households, the vehicles that they have are really not fuel efficient. They're not buying the new EVs. They are, and that's why we had a provision, because they're not to just limit assistance to EVs, but to very higher mileage, gas vehicles. And so they're in the secondhand market, which tends not to get the same economy necessarily as other vehicles. So it's.
But I think that's what she's saying, is that the efficient cars, they do better on the per mile. That's
Yeah.
per gallon.
That's leading back to that, of course. Well, it's.
Yeah, and the other thing here too is it's not even that. So
We haven't been talking about, you're talking about all vehicles, and we've been kind of thinking about how we replace the gas tax for EVs and plug-in hybrids. So I guess the important thing here is, as we're talking, is to make sure that we're talking about all vehicles as opposed to where we don't have a structure to capture the lost revenues that would have been derived from the gas tax.
The one thing I'll kind of, the way that I think about this research is that the state has plans to fully transition to all electric vehicles. So another way to view this work is the projected situation of Vermont financially for every household. So this is all households. If all households owned an electric vehicle and all electric vehicles are paying a mileage fee, this is that future situation.
Okay, that's really helpful.
And it's not to use household, but it really is cars or vehicles. Like where you don't know how many, well, I guess you would know, were you calculating on household? Did you look at those addresses and say, oh, this address has 4 cars registered, so we're gonna combine that as a household? Or did you do it like?
Yeah, so we did it by household. And to the extent that we have accurate unit numbers, we were able to account for the multi-family households and things like that too. So basically any vehicles registered at the same address were considered a household. And we did this only for personal vehicles. So not commercial vehicles, not registered at commercial addresses, not like heavy duty vehicles, just light duty residential vehicles. So we considered these households.
Were you confused about a certain house in Colchester that had 22 cars registered to
that
it?
specific.
Right.
We had to do some data cleaning. I believe all the vehicles that we kept in this data set, and this is written in the journal too, if there's further interest in just the methods behind this, because this is published and available. But I believe that we limited it to households that had less than 7 vehicles.
Right. Over 7 vehicles, but none of them really have any miles probably.
It would be crazy if they did.
I like, do you think there'll be that many cars that are gonna go to electric? I feel there's a resistance to go to electric. And I think that they anticipated a lot more in sales of electric vehicles than we're getting. So is that something that you think they'll go for more hybrids, or electric is it's very difficult to sell? The sales aren't there where they should be, I understand. So just wondering what changed the trend, because I think people are concerned about the electric vehicles, the charging stations, and where they're going to charge. And so that's why I thought the hybrids are the ones that are going to be the sellers.
Yeah, so I'll answer that. We currently have research going on. It's not finished yet, where we've been surveying new car people purchasing new cars at dealers at the point of sale, and asking about their decisions about the vehicle they just bought, because obviously dealers don't want us to influence whatever sale they're making. But after they make the car, after they purchase a car, there's a survey you can take. And we ask your knowledge of different EV incentives. We ask about various characteristics that were important to you in that purchase to try to really understand what people are currently thinking about. Are they concerned about mileage? Are they concerned about the cost, the range anxiety, and these sorts of things? And so we're in the midst of that data collection. We don't really have results to share on that. And we're closing in on 9:30, but we do have a project where we're tracking in a very spatially detailed way using some of the same data, which households are, how the vehicle fleet's evolving in different parts of the state in terms of EVs, hybrids, plug-ins, and then also how much each of those vehicles is being driven, because you might buy a battery electric vehicle and have another vehicle you use, and it's, just because you have the electric vehicle, you may use it more or less. And so we are tracking all that data and are creating a data dashboard that will be publicly available, so you can actually dig into some of this data yourself and see what's going on. But those are the type of questions we're trying to answer. We don't have, we can speculate as much as anyone else right now about what the future EV market looks like, but there's seem to be some challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Ms. Nelson, that's interesting conclusions of the first paper, so we'll let you move on. Community rides, how tight are you guys for time? Okay, we might go past 9:30.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of main takeaway from that one is that there's this perception out there that rural and low income households may be disproportionately hurt financially by a mileage fee. And our research suggested that that's generally not true, that rural households, low income households on average would see savings relative to higher income and more urban households. So there's this misconception maybe out there, which is grounded in rational belief. And we wanted to see, if we're to give this information to people, does it shift their opinion about mileage fees at all? Because one of the biggest issues with mileage fees that they've been suffering from really low public support. So we conducted 2 different public opinion surveys. The first one that we did was a pilot for a larger national survey. First one, we surveyed people in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We received about 700 responses, about 230 from each state that we surveyed. And what we did is we asked them to rank their support for an alternative to the gas tax. So do you support replacing the gas tax with a mileage fee? And then we educated them after that about, so live in the survey, we calculated how much the gas tax currently is for their household in terms of like annual dollars. We did that based on asking for their mileage information on their car and also their fuel economy. So we calculated and displayed to them how much they currently spend in the gas tax. And then we calculated how much they would spend under a hypothetical mileage fee and also showed that to them. So live in the survey, they're given these cost comparisons. We also showed them videos about the fairness of mileage fees from an extensive literature review of what is currently known about mileage fees from research all across the US. And then also privacy information. That's another thing that we hypothesized was a big factor in how people feel about mileage fees. So we walked them through the different ways that mileage can be collected. One of our findings, a lot of people have associations with tracking with mileage fees. And there's alternatives that don't involve any sort of location data. So we were kind of just generally sharing all of this information with them, calculating costs, showing them videos, walking through privacy and fairness. And then we asked them again how they feel about a mileage fee to replace the gas tax. So we did this small survey in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and then a larger national survey about a year later. What we found is that support for mileage fees increases with this pretty simple educational experience. Both of the videos that we showed them were only about 2 or 3 minutes long and were put together by me, so not like the most impressive videos in the world. But these simple educational experiences are effective at increasing support for mileage fees. Also, and more specifically, cost was a huge factor in people's decision to support mileage fee. And one of the really interesting things here is that regardless of whether or not this respondent in the survey learned they were saving or losing money with a mileage fee, they still were more likely to support it after costs were displayed to them. And we believe that this is related to another finding from the survey, where people just are generally the respondents in our survey are generally not super informed about the gas tax. They didn't know how much it cost them every year. They didn't have a great idea of what it funded. They didn't have a great idea of when it had last been raised within their state. So this kind of general lack of information about the gas tax amongst the respondents in our survey, we believe that when we actually show them the costs and they see, oh, I only pay $150 a year in gas taxes, and it would only be about a $10 change. We believe that this kind of putting into perspective how many dollars this actually is increases support generally. And I can talk more about that too. Other ways that support for mileage fees could be increased based on the survey responses was structuring the rates so that they're coupled with other policy objectives. So, having a lower income rate mileage fee, also having a block rate was popular in the survey. This is the idea that for the first, say, 5,000 miles that somebody travels, they pay one rate. And then for the next 5,000 miles, they pay a slightly heightened rate. So it's increasing disincentives to drive, basically. And this is something that's been suggested by other mileage fee researchers. So we were curious how people thought about it in this survey. And then the last important way that mileage fee support could be increased from our survey respondents were by offering multiple mileage collection technologies. So people who had privacy concerns were generally more likely to support a mileage fee that was collected using odometer readings. Also, educating people about how mileage information could be collected seemed to be effective, regardless of their attitudes at increasing support. So sharing with people, you can collect mileage using an odometer reading, you can collect it using something that plugs into your car that doesn't have GPS or something that plugs in that does. Just having the overall knowledge that these options are out there seemed to increase support amongst the people in the survey. So just kind of summarizing all of that together, we find we've been looking at the revenue generating ability of different policies in Vermont to fund transportation systems, and just kind of pointing to that the electric vehicles currently are not contributing to this funding besides point of sale taxes. But there's also just general issues with reductions in gas consumption among people who still drive gas and diesel vehicles because overall fuel economies are increasing. So the issue extends slightly beyond just electric vehicles. We find that public support for mileage, any alternative to the gas tax, including flat fees, is generally pretty low. It's about 30%, but this isn't a fixed number. We find that simple educational experiences are pretty effective at increasing the support up to 50%, and that in addressing misinformation or lacking education, privacy and cost are the most important things to be thinking about. So telling people about the different options for mileage collection and telling them about how much it would cost them. And this is something that we have the ability to do in Vermont based on our inspection records that we have access to. And then also we find that because Vermont already collects mileage during annual safety inspections, this would be a feasible thing for the state of Vermont to do. I know you guys are already aware of that in terms of electric vehicles, but it could extend beyond that potentially. And right now, and something else you might be aware of, the federal government currently has funding for state mileage fee pilot programs. So this is something that the state could potentially use to explore more of the kinks in the system that might need to get worked out.
2002 or 2001 or something, and we still don't know when that application is.
22. Oh.
Well, I don't know.
You're 2 decades
Maybe
behind.
they did know too, I don't know. 22.
If I could jump in.
Yes.
So great presentation. Thank you, Claire. Really appreciate it. Your first bullet, though, on the revenue generating ability with the slow rate of electric vehicle adoption only applies mileage fees to electric vehicles. I get that it won't close the funding gap, but it'll help. And I feel like I right now am in a place where we're in a transition stage before we can get to vehicle mile travel fee because there's administrative logistical issues. I think it's fair and I support possibly looking at a battery electric vehicle only surcharge or additional charge for the registration fee to help close that funding gap. I don't know if you have any reaction to that, but that's something that I personally am supportive of right now.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, do you want to take this? I have my opinion too.
Yeah, well, I think, we wanted to kind of, we haven't specifically looked at that question of the the revenue replacement or generating capacity of just the current electric vehicles and thought about the equity of who exactly owns those and where they are. It's something that we could certainly do with the data we have, but we haven't looked at that. So I'm going to, not express an opinion on that. I mean, I think, what we've looked at, and I think what eventually we all know we're going to have to find some replacement to the gas tax at some point. And I think, as you point out, there are administrative costs to consider with the different ways that the program could be stood up and the way it could be structured. And I think that's something that's really important to consider. There are a number of trade-offs. And then we haven't gotten into it here, and it would take a lot more time, but there are a number of different ways to make this work to collect fees from out-of-state drivers as well, that are being piloted all over the country, that don't necessarily require GPS devices and tracking and that sort of thing. And so, it's those last two bullets we see that are.
You like that, Tom? Take a look at that.
But I think, if we could have a pilot program, there's funding for these would be good opportunities to try to dig into and explore some of these final, these last bullet points and how that would work.
I had a question too, but go ahead, Senator.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Well, what I was thinking is during this transition period, obviously the goal is to move to an all-electric. We have a long period of time before that happens. And in fact, many of the, I can see right now, if you're paying the gas tax, and we have a love affair with our pickup trucks and our SUVs, many of them are very low mileage vehicles. And so they're consuming and polluting more, basically, during that transition period of time. If we were to go all to a mileage usage, we are, in fact, we almost might be cross-subsidizing those vehicles that are, if you use just mileage, that in fact are costing more, or you're losing more revenue simply because they're very very low miles per gallon, and they're also introducing more carbon into the environment. So I'm just thinking about that period of time, which is going to be over a period of a decade or so before. And so the extent to which you look at what that transition would be, because I could see some really, what you're doing potentially here is having the most fuel efficient and the electric vehicle owners cross-subsidizing another group of vehicle owners.
So what you're describing is true in the sense that a move from the gas tax to a mileage fee will mean that people driving larger, less fuel efficient vehicles would be paying less. This is why this change would generally reduce costs in rural areas, and that those who drive more fuel efficient vehicles would be paying slightly more. And I think what's important to keep in mind here is that the gas tax is largely, the intent is to pay for maintenance of the transportation system, which, there's a huge funding gap and we're not keeping up with maintenance. This was not designed as an environmental fee, although it acts that way, you're right, because we're charging per gallon of fuel, and burning a gallon of fuel produces a certain quantity of greenhouse gas emissions. And so the current structure has that element to it. There, there's if the state was concerned in preserving that type of incentive as well, there's no reason to completely eliminate the gas tax. You could retain some portion as an environmental tax on the carbon content of the fuel, while also having a mileage fee that, even if you drive a Tesla, it takes up space on the roadway, it contributes to wear and tear, it contributes to congestion, and is actually quite a bit heavier than a regular passenger vehicle. So in that way, it can also contribute more to maintenance needs as well. So,
and Greg, if I could jump in here really quick too.
Yeah.
The other thing I consider with this is that keeping in mind that these cost differences that we're talking about are very minimal for most households. It would be about a $10 difference every year. So if I think that $10 a year, somebody might not, be making vast changes in their driving behavior. The other thing to consider too that I think about frequently is that this is just the gas tax. These vehicles are still consuming more gallons of gas, and that the cost of gas and the gallons of gas that they're consuming is the larger portion of what they're paying at the pump. And so there's still a financial disincentive for them to drive because they're purchasing the quantity of gas that that vehicle requires of them. So those are just the two little points I throw in there.
Go ahead, Senator.
And we also have the opportunity to get it right. We have an opportunity to make sure that whatever we stand up and start to build upon is right. The thought out process that we can start collecting some money now and then try to plug the gaps and holes about how we actually maximize the amount of funds that we're trying to replace. We have time to get it right. If we keep on taking data on this and making smart decisions, we don't have to try to tear down something that we built up to begin with.
That's also a good point, and I think, well, and I'll let Claire can discuss this too, but there's a lot of states are actually standing up these alternative programs with the gas tax at the same time, and so there's various opt-in programs. There's no reason to get rid of what we have while we try to develop and get right an alternative. And there's a lot of examples. We could share information with you later on that.
Yeah, I think that's
the one just. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Nelson.
I was going to say the one example that I've seen that was interesting is there's this reimbursement program that some states are exploring. So you're reimbursed for the difference between your mileage and gas tax. So you pay the gas tax like normal, and then as almost like a tax return, you're reimbursed for that difference. So you might see some savings, you might see some maybe additional payments or something like that. But it's a way to maintain the same system as we currently have while still experimenting with this new one.
Well, we were gonna have to have you guys back. I know you had some other slides about the emissions dashboard tracker, but not that we don't have time for that today. And I think on this research on the mileage-based research fee is very useful for us, and we hope to work with you more. And I think one question I had, but we don't have time to really talk about it, is just behavioral response. If you're paying a gas tax at the pump and the per gallon is higher, does that disincentive driving because you're realizing that cost every time you pull into the gas station versus if you get it once a year or a quarter, and how we feather out gas tax and feather up mileage charges, and how are there different ways that we can collect it that have impact on just behavior. But I know you probably have ideas for that, but I'm not going to let you talk about it. So we're going to have you back, so that's the good news.
Yeah.
Great.
Continue learning more about the good work you do at the research center.
Yeah, that was good work. The way that you guys were able to leverage or find out where these vehicles were and with the data that you had available, I was impressed by that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us, and we're happy to come back whenever you'll have us. And we do have some work on how people respond to prices, and there's as you see, there's a lot of data and information we have that we could certainly use to also think about a lot of these other questions that have been raised today.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, you'll hear from our assistant Megan about scheduling another time, and we'll think of some other questions we can maybe present. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Will be you, Sue, or?
Yeah, I'm just going to start with a little introduction, and thank you for having us in. I know I'm not asking for any money, so I'm just giving you my annual, very late Valentine's. And
yeah, last time we said no, we didn't get anything.
I know. I'm sorry. I did consider flowers, but instead, look at this. We have a never fail. If am I supposed to sit here or there? Is this the deal?
Well, that's Senator Mazza's chair.
Oh,
so you have
Senator,
to ask
I am
Senator Mazza.
so sorry, sir. I couldn't understand how to be seen in the, I obviously don't know how to do this exactly, but there's a really cool little flower thing in the end. I will get it organized for your chair. I think I already broke it.
So I'm connected.
So I actually probably need to go into Chris's chair. Senator,
Hey, good morning.
good morning. I have a little gift for you
I'll figure that out.
and a card for whenever you're here next. But I'm so
Okay,
happy
thank
to
you.
be in front
Thank
of
you.
your committee.
Appreciate it.
Into the witness chair.
We can use it. Want to be down there?
I messed it up.
Where'd you find Chris Cole?
They found me under a rock.
That's my
Oh,
secret weapon that I'm bringing to you today. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us a little time to share a story about an innovative microtransit pilot program that you and the agency have been helping to, I guess, incubate. For the record, I'm Sue Minter. I'm the executive director of Capstone Community Action, which is a nonprofit anti-poverty organization, and we focus on meeting people in crisis, whether it's food, housing, or heat in the winter, but also providing tools and opportunities to help people rise out of poverty. And come to find out, for folks of very low income, and I want to recognize and appreciate your support for the program we kind of started together in this committee room, Mileage Smart, which has become very successful, incentivizing for low and moderate income folks the purchase of used vehicles. And I want to mention that we have a record-breaking month. This month of February, already 60 cars sold, and in the last 2 months, 113. So
Well, it's a good thing we moved $1 million.
well, that is why we asked for it, because we saw that movement. Thank you. And I know that hasn't come in, that's in the BAA, right? So thank you for that support, Senator. I really appreciate it. And I know we are still working on that particular case that you brought to my attention.
Good.
The Mileage Smart incentive is there. We're just waiting for the replace your ride piece of it and getting in touch with them. Okay, so we're here to talk about a new, really a new nonprofit called Community Rides Vermont. So part of Capstone's history is that we have incubated initiatives. The food bank actually was once a program of Capstone, as was Down Street Housing, our affordable housing organization in Central Vermont. Capstone is in Central Vermont, so that's Washington County, Orange County, and Lamoille County. That is our service area prescribed by the federal government. And we have incubated even Community Capital of Vermont. And so this is the newest incubation, Community Rides Vermont. And it is, as you will learn, also linking in our state agenda around transitioning to electric vehicles. I was actually for 3 years serving as a Senate appointee to the Climate Council, and trying to come up with ways to think both about how do we work on alleviating poverty and help with the transition to the green economy. So I would say this program and this initiative is very much birthed out of that. And it is an all-electric fleet of cars that is currently up and running. We have been in the very early parts, and we are going to have a public launch and invite all of you to our garage at Capstone, which still is housing, hopefully only for another few months.
Did you get flooded?
Oh, yes, we did, as did our garage, but our cars could move. Senator, we have a design engineer. Our building is 10 years old, so it's designed out of the floodplain. So all of our building was a foot away from the 2 feet of mud that did accumulate, except in our garage, where we were able to move most. Unfortunately, some of our weatherization equipment was impacted. The biggest thing is we couldn't open our food shelf, not because it was flooded, but because of 2 feet of mud. But it was open within a week and providing hundreds of meals every day to that flood. You opened an interesting story of flooding.
Didn't want to.
No, but we had a resilient design, and the engineer, it worked, is what I actually really want you to understand. Exactly to the point where it was designed to flood to.
Sue, do many dealers want to service electric vehicles, or I hear that they shy away from servicing them?
Well, I think that's a great question for you to ask of the general manager of this initiative, who is here with us, Amanda Carlson. And I think I should stop talking because you have a lot of questions. And you asked, where did Chris come from? I had to work hard to reel him in. And Chris is now the executive director, part-time, of this Community Rides Vermont, this nonprofit organization. I am president of the board. This is no longer a program of Capstone. It is a fully independent nonprofit. It pays rent to Capstone, but we do have now 4 vehicles, 6 drivers, part-time. You'll hear more about where we are. But we are on the precipice of really growing, and we work as a subrecipient to Green Mountain Transit. So we are very much focused on supplementing our existing transit service with new ways to support not only the folks they're trying to help, which is the elderly and disabled, Medicaid transportation, et cetera, but also support folks who we know can't get to the doctor, can't get to work, and can't get to childcare and school. We are actually now getting a lot of contracts from schools to help unhoused children get to school, because schools are mandated to get those folks who are homeless. So sadly, in the Barre system alone, that's 200 children. So just to give you some insight and some setup for introducing Chris, who's really going to do the presentation. I appreciate your time as always, and I'm here to answer questions, but I think it's best that I pass it over and maybe you can get to the good senator's question. Thank you.
We're going to take care of the good senator's question right away by giving it to Amanda, who is here somewhere. Amanda, have we had any issues with dealers in terms of servicing our electric vehicles, and have we had any electric vehicles that have actually needed service?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Carlson, and I am the general manager at Community Rides Vermont. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. We have a very tiny administrative team, and half of that team is on vacation this week, so I'm manning the ship. But to answer your specific question, Senator Mazza, we have been really fortunate that local dealers are open to servicing the vehicles, and month 10 into operation and about 40,000 miles under our hoods, we haven't had to do any significant maintenance, but in terms of kind of typical tire rotations and vehicle inspections, the local garages, who are very much geared towards like big heavy duty vehicles, have been willing to learn how to operate our Teslas and Hyundais, and no issues there so far.
Yeah, I thought I saw the other day that, I don't know if it was G-Stone or one of them was reluctant to work on electric vehicles. I didn't know if that was a statewide trend or just a few dealers that were reluctant.
Yeah, I think when we get into more significant maintenance, we will have to go directly to the manufacturer, which for our Teslas will be really tricky. They are opening up a service center in South Burlington, but knock on wood, if something terrible was to happen to our Tesla vehicles, tomorrow, we'd probably have to transport them to New York, which is, I know, a lot of issue for Vermont residents that have Teslas. They have to get them transported out of state. But I think that'd probably be the case with most electric cars, is that people are getting them repaired at dealerships versus smaller mom and pop garages, because it is a pretty significant investment to get the computer equipment to fully maintain EVs at this kind of early stage?
Good question. I want to go back. We're creating a new nonprofit. Every nonprofit has to come with infrastructure and administrative costs. A lot of what you're talking about is very much aligned with what, say, for example, RCT has been doing. They're doing a lot more microtransit. They're doing school transportation. They're doing a lot of the same things that you're talking about. This would do. What benefit you get from creating a new nonprofit as opposed to taking this concept and embedding it or and using it kind of to inform our public transit infrastructure that's already in place. And the reason I'm saying that, of course, is every time a new nonprofit gets created, there's additional administrative costs. So if this were to be replicated throughout the state, you'd have sort of like parallel public transit entities to some extent. I'm just raising the question because I'm back to when Gretchen Morse was chair of United Way, and she said every time a new nonprofit gets created, it adds more demand for funding and pressure on your charitable, or in this case, maybe this budget. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
Excellent question. You asked it last time I was here, and I know it's on your mind.
Well, it is because we have a budget that has so little money, frankly.
So we are, we're funded in a variety of ways, but when we get to year 3 of our business plan, when we have enough vehicles out on the street, we will achieve a balance between operations and administrative costs. Right now, our hourly rate is $81. We just had a board meeting the other night. It's $81. We're charging the state of Vermont $68.71 for services that we provide. So we're undercharging. We're making up that difference in fundraising, which we have to actively fundraise for the 3 years. The agency didn't have the funding to pay for startup expenses or for the administrative expenses that are exceeding our operating costs because we're so small. We have 2 people in our administrative side. One is on vacation, so Amanda's at the shop, and we have 6 drivers. So we've intentionally kept our organization lean and mean. We're starting a new service. So whether or not public transportation operates this service or whether we operate this service, there will be additional administrative expense because it's a new program. That's just inherent. Every transit region in this state is different, and they have different capabilities. They have a different service profile. You have the urbanized area in Chittenden County, you've got the Northeast Kingdom, and you've got Washington County. And I think right now, you know, if you're living in a GMT rural area, it's really no surprise that that organization is having some challenges serving its rural members. And you can understand this by looking at routes that aren't operating because they don't have the capacity to hire additional drivers, funding needs. They've had to cut some routes.
Or the volunteer drivers aren't there.
Volunteer drivers out there, and these are legitimate issues that they're struggling with. And what happens is that impacts our community in Barre and in Washington County because we don't have the services needed to get people to work. What our service is beyond that, though, beyond the services that should already be in our community. And it goes beyond that to serve the larger community in terms of a lifeline of transportation. So we only offer general public equity transportation. Public transportation is an equity program of state government. They share the responsibility with the federal government. We only operate that for the general public in population centers. So pretty much the entire Northeast Kingdom doesn't get general public transportation. They can get Medicaid transportation, elderly and disabled, recovery, but by and large, aside from commuter routes, St. John's.
They're doing some micro.
And they're doing some microtransit, but that is like maybe, I don't even know what the percentage of the area is, but it's very small. And so the people, because we're having a housing crisis in the state, who cannot afford houses where jobs are, Chittenden County, have to live outside of Chittenden County and then commute into Chittenden County, which was why we started commuter routes in 2002. is to reduce the congestion and pollution and start those. And so in our profile of our district in Washington County, we have in Barrie one of the largest concentrations of poverty on a per capita basis in one of our little urbanized areas. The flood has exacerbated that. And the people we've been transporting for the last year, we started last April transporting people, 50% of them, and Amanda can do a better job at this than I can, 50% of them are low income families with children who are in motels, they're houseless.
I'm not debating the importance of
Yeah, you're looking at the
service.
institutional
I'm
arrangement.
looking, I'm looking at.
So regardless of whether or not GMT was providing this service, and they don't have the capacity, they just don't. Another entity needs to provide it if we're going to do the service. And we're all of these individual crises in their silos are all interconnected. Transportation and housing are interconnected, and getting a good job. All three of them are interconnected. And we don't have a service provider that could provide this service.
Who is doing the
This is a new pilot program.
I know, who is doing the E&D and
O&D.
Medicare, O&D now, O&D and the Medicare before.
O&D?
It's called.
It's not elderly, now it's older.
I just want to quickly mention that I think these are really important questions and, things that we pondered at the beginning of this, and seeing that there were unmet needs, and the idea that a nonprofit, especially a small one, has the ability to look at a braided funding. It's not all public. It's public. We have actually gotten some sort of startup funds from individuals who really are interested in this, and we're getting private funds. So we receive funds from VLight. There are grant opportunities that I think it would be very hard for an existing public transit operator to jump into this kind of a structure. And I think it does avail different funding streams that I think benefit this particular structure. But I do think it's a really important question.
So the proof of concept that we're trying to demonstrate here, this 3-year project, is that by having both a not-for-profit side of our business, an equity service with government funding through public transportation to fund mobility for all rides, so general public transportation and EV vehicles throughout the county, we're also going to have a market-based side. So we already have market. So we haven't advertised at all since April. It's all word of mouth. January was our largest trip for Mobility for All. It was 430 rides, Amanda? Yep, 430 rides, no advertising. All word of mouth from people who don't have access to public transportation.
And people through like O&D and Medicare.
We provide those rides for GMT as well. So we provide those rides for them when they don't have volunteers. So on a daily basis or the day before, they're calling Amanda and they're scheduling rides that they don't have volunteers for. So, when we started this partnership with VTrans, that was Ross's main driver. Is GMT was getting a lot of trip denials from Medicaid recipients, olders and disabilities, and people who are going to recovery. And for the month of January, we had a lot of business from GMT because they were encouraged to use us a little bit more.
So of that 430, how much was fit into those 3 buckets? Is it like the vast majority, or is it just? That's
an Amanda question. Amanda, out of the total number of rides we gave, was 430 the just Mobility for All, or did that include Medicaid, E&D, O&D, recovery?
It was actually, it was a total of 466 trips last month, and 347 of them were Mobility for All. So about 120 were rides that we assist Green Mountain Transit with the O&D and Medicaid rides. So 347 of them were trips that we originated on our own. And that demographic of people is kind of people that fall through the cracks, either because it's a last minute trip that public transit isn't really suited to serve, or people that don't have a disability, it isn't for a medical reason, kind of extenuating trips that the current public transit programs don't serve. So, trips to laundry, trips to daycare,
How do you
last minute trips.
So we have 80% funding from GMT through a subrecipient agreement. This is the second subrecipient agreement we've had with them. That funding is provided by the Agency of Transportation. We have to raise the 20% match.
Right.
And so
you get paid per ride or
per
like a block?
Per ride. It's per hour, actually. Our billing rate is $68.71 a ride. That's what we bill the state of Vermont. They give us 80% of that. And then our market-based services, our rate is closer to $80 right now. It's 81. We charge $85 to
So you are doing some market-based?
Yes, we've taken a few people to the airport who have the ability to pay, and our contracts with school districts are market-based rates, covering our actual hourly rate.
So you're a form of Uber.
We are, as Sue likes to say, we're Ruber. We're the rural Uber, but we have not gig economy drivers. We have paid drivers who are members of our community. Some of them are low income as well. Some of them are retired. We have a former school superintendent from Washington County is one of our drivers. So it's a wide range of people.
And our car, show the picture of the car, our service is now going to be called Gopher, because you can go for it. And that is what we're doing, the public launch of our Gopher service in May, which will be much more like the Uber kind of system, because we are transitioning now to an app-based effort.
So community right to happen now, but they call Amanda. Amanda's scheduled it.
Amanda, tell us how you get a ride. Maybe you want to go to the.
Yeah, right now, everyone calls, but there's also, this is kind of an interesting thing that is one aspect to answer Senator Kitchell's question about, why our service. And I think, as Sue mentioned, we can kind of skirt some in between a public transit provider and a private operator. We're kind of a quasi public transit provider. So one of the main modes of communication that we communicate with our passengers with is via text, actually, which really works to communicate with a lot of low-income people. So the majority of rides are coming in through phone call, but I would say about 30% of rides are requested via text. And that's just not something that public transit agencies are suited to do at this moment due to the rules that they have to follow.
We have a software program that has microtransit in it. It has ride scheduling, booking, billing, all in one. State of Vermont did a procurement through the VPTA and purchases for transit agencies across the state. We purchased our own, and we're going to use that as the entryway for people who have a smartphone to use that app. Otherwise, as Amanda said, people will be calling. I think this is an interesting transit map, as it shows you these are all the general public routes where the general public can either pay a fare or not pay a fare and get on a bus and go. Every area that doesn't have a line in it is not served by general public transportation. Specialized transportation, yes, Medicaid and O&D and recovery, but not the general. And as people are aging in place and as people live farther away from their jobs because of housing prices, transportation is a real barrier to the quality of life. And one of the things that I didn't expect about this service that is occurring is we're serving a lot of people who are eligible for Medicaid and can't start recovery right away. So to you wake up one morning and say, today's the day I'm going to recovery, they have a spot available for you. You're ready to go. You don't have a ride. Your Medicaid doesn't kick in until you receive approval. That could take 3 days. You're ready to go today. We take those people. We take them to their recovery appointment and we get them started in recovery.
I'm just starting to align this because we had Caleb Grant in, and obviously our CT is the most rural part. And
yes.
they're actually, what he's saying is fixed routes don't work.
That's correct.
And they're into much more on demand, and they're doing micro transit. And what?
Only in March.
Well, I know, well, they're doing some in the other area. And I'm just thinking that if you're looking at do you build on infrastructure that you've got? And the extent to which the very concepts that you're talking about here can get embedded within existing infrastructure. And my inclination is, yes, it can. A lot depends on how the funding goes out and what the funding is that comes from AOT. Because, you know, I've been told that old traditional fixed route actually serves to disadvantage the rural areas of the state that have to deal with a much more individualized and on-demand need. And so I'm just taking your conversation and all the points that you're making with the very same points that Caleb Grant, who's now the new director, has made to us. And I thought he was very eloquent the day that he came in terms of how he envisions that system and that organization to function out into the future. So that's why I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying about the need and the flexibility. And I live in a rural area. I'm not as rural as Canaan, for example, but because I'm right on Route 2, but I understand transportation needs. And interestingly enough, he said the most frequent trips they make are to court after the hairdressers. So to me, that's indicative of the kind of flexibility and how they're trying to meet those individualized needs. So that, my only point is, if there's something that we can, and that's why I put Medicaid transportation with private transit, with public transit, to build and support that infrastructure. And I just see this as, you know, we're creating something else that potentially is designed to address an inadequacy of our current system, but then we're creating a parallel structure, potentially, unless we look very carefully, that has some parallel mission and will ultimately get created. And as someone who sits on the budget committee, I would anticipate at some point in the future would be, well, here's a wonderful program, the people really need it, and we need money.
But I think that's why the agency asked us to work directly as sub-recipients. We are essentially an arm of the existing Green Mountain Transit. We've been in touch with Caleb.
You're creating a new administrative structure.
Correct,
because GMT doesn't have the capacity to create the administrative structure to manage this pilot program
at this moment
in time.
We're meeting unmet needs, filling a niche with a new model.
So what Caleb is saying is 100% correct. And Morrisville, where the microtransit operates, is the perfect size community to host microtransit. But microtransit not only, you know, works. So Agency of Transportation.
Well, then maybe you should have given GMT more money.
So let me tell the story. So they did give GMT more money, and they gave them money for microtransit in Barrie, which we desperately need. 50% of the people that we transport are in the microtransit region.
Very good.
That their contractor has identified.
Come from anybody.
What?
So ideally, we would like to have microtransit in Barrie, but GMT doesn't have the capacity to start it, to plan it, to staff the drivers, and to operate it. They're cutting other routes. And so we very much would like to be a microtransit operator in our county. Because transit agencies have third-party operators all over the country, and we have them in Vermont. GMT's other third-party operators are SSTA, which does their lift equipped van service in Chittenden County. Their other subrecipient and operator is somebody near and dear to Senator Mazza's heart. It's Cider in Grand Isle, and they do their operations. Both those agencies also have their own administrative support because they have to. And we have to have one too. So
when do you become direct competition and start surpassing GMT? And what's your growth plans? I mean, when at some point in time, and I think what Senator Kitchell is getting at, you're going to be in direct competition with a program that we're already funding. So when does that happen?
Never. So we have this thing that's called the hierarchy of trip. And it's a decision matrix. It's a decision tree on how you get a trip. Somebody calls up our office, calls up GMT. Both people will do the same analysis. Is that trip originating from 3/4 of a mile of a public transit route? And is the destination 3/4 of a mile? And if it is, then they need to take the bus. So we're not duplicating services operationally at all. The way transit, fixed route does work in certain areas. It works well in Chittenden County, and it works well between Barre and Montpelier. But in other areas like the Hospital Hill or other areas, you can do microtransit. And so the area that we want to serve in Barre is a microtransit. Then the next layer out in the rural areas is mobility for all. So I see the system functioning as a whole: fixed route, microtransit, electric vehicles taking people in rural areas. All of that is eventually over time what we're building for, because we have to do something in terms of helping people get to work, helping people get to treatment, and taking care of what they need to in their lives.
This is a very important conversation. I remember one editorial by the St. Albans Messenger, I want to say within the last 2 or 3 years, stating that Vermont has the highest per capita nonprofits than any other state in the nation, and more than twice as many as New Hampshire per capita wise. So I think where you're coming from is there a more efficient way to do this? And I'm sharing the concern that we might be standing up another nonprofit when maybe if this was part of, or more formally an arm of GMT, we create some administrative efficiencies. You used to be the GMT manager.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a path where this might be handed off to GMT?
No. They can't provide their basic public transit functions in their rural areas now. They don't have enough volunteer drivers. They're cutting back on routes. And, you know, this is something that's been in the making over the last 10 years.
And you're able to do that.
We raise a significant amount of philanthropic dollars as well as other grant funds, aside from state funds, that are paying for our startup costs, are paying for our employees. You know, we cover all of our operations with the revenues we generate through the equity programs and through our market-based programs. What we're not covering is, what was the figure, Amanda? It was about $9,000 last month. I think we were $9,000 short. So we had to dip into some of the funds we had to raise to cover that. But we're really close. We weren't expecting to be this close until year 3. In year 3, we had hoped to have 20 to 30 cars out on the road, have that level of market-based trips for school districts, for private sector, maybe some employer trips, as well as the equity trips. All of that will make us self-sustaining after 3 years. It's a different model. The public transit model is 100% support from government, federal government, state government, local government. That's the model. That is not our model. We will always probably have to fundraise some, maybe to cover that objectionable administrative cost that you policymakers think we may be expanding. I don't, because if we're going to do new programs like microtransit, we need to have a microtransit operator. And if we need to have 2 microtransits operating together, Montpelier and Barre, they need to talk to each other. Right now, the technology doesn't talk to each other. So things have to be made different in this service area. And one of the things that we're hoping is an entity, because we can be experts in microtransit, we can be experts in the algorithm and the Q-Ride. We're not focusing. Sometimes things get too big, and sometimes they get too big and they're hard to manage. And
I
GMT
think
may be that entity at this point in its life cycle.
I would like to say that this is a pilot that we're learning from. And I think that every question is very valid and valuable. And we are not trying to disrupt the existing. We're trying to meet unmet needs in a way that we think maybe we can actually be self-sustaining. That's the goal. If there is a goal of microtransit in Barre, and if GMT is not interested in it, we are considering maybe we should try to provide that. We're trying to provide services that the existing structure can't. We're very excited about Caleb's vision. We're communicating with Capstone service area includes Morrisville. So I'm very much interested in how we do that. I think every question you raise is important. It is interesting. Remember how we have no regional government, right? We have no county government. We have a very bare bones government, and a lot of nonprofits do sort of the work of government. I mean, here we give out food and we help people find housing. You know, I think part of that equation is how, you know, modest relative to other states our government structure is. I mean, just your legislature, look at you in other states, you know that people earn a salary and full-time and have staff, and you don't. So I wonder sometimes if part of that interesting demographic relates to really the scaffolding of state government, and how sometimes nonprofits, look at the agencies on aging, the mental health providers, they're really almost an arm of government. Yet they are a nonprofit. So I don't know if that might be part of it, because I think it's an extremely interesting question.
Well, what we've seen actually historically is not strong county governments been town.
Yes.
And towns used to have a much larger role, and they had responsibility for social welfare programs, for the poor, for the elderly, for healthcare and so forth. And that turned out to be too much of a economic burden, because usually the poorest communities had the greatest need, and that drove bringing it to the state level to really address that disproportionate impact depending on very poor towns. And you did have, you know, very poor towns where the costs were very struggle, sort of like the education debate. So we have actually moved just about everything from town up to the state. And now we've created this psychology or attitude that somehow the state can address all these horrendous problems that are facing our communities. And I'm like, we had a horrible debate how much we can do for emergency housing.
Believe me.
And so that's why I'm just saying every dime that we spend for administration is a dime that we don't have for something else that is out there with very compelling needs. And everybody can give a very articulate and a very compassionate justification for that need. And so I'm just seeing the expectations of what state government can do is exceeding our capacity and our ability.
And I think this is an example of trying to deal with that, because I see them as they started a business. It just happens to be a nonprofit. So people also just automatically assume if they're a nonprofit, they're going to want money from the government, but that's not the model. And I think we have other examples of that.
Yes, absolutely.
And what happens if it's a business? Since the business probably wouldn't come to us for funding for themselves, but they would come to the state and say, you need to fund our writers. So don't fund us, but give a subsidy to the writers so that we can make money. So we would celebrate it as a business. And if we had this number of like the most number of startups, we would think it was a good thing. But the startups is not. Well, I know, but if it was a for-profit, for some reason it's good. If it's a nonprofit.
Oh, I'm not getting into that, because multiple doors are there justifying, you know, an expenditure. I'm just laying out. You know, the experience that we have, and oftentimes grants, we get grants, and they then they end and they say, well, you know this, you should just continue, and we'll get the state to pick it up. And then de facto that becomes the priority of the state, if in fact over and above everything else. So it's just and so I'm only asking these questions really to put your feet to the fire to say, how are you going to make this work? Why is it different? How can we, in fact, other areas, maybe we can take that same, you know, some of the same principles and look at how we could do things differently to address the need in a different way in a different part of the state. So that's really, I realize I'm being perhaps a little strident on it, but our budget is so horrible that I'm just very, very sensitive to anything. And if you're saying this is a model that will require that, more power to you.
Because you're saying really you're not duplicity. You are saying you're in addition to, and that you do not want to compete. You're filling a void.
They're complementary.
Right.
Um,
We work with public transit and we want to continue to work with them. And in fact, we'd like to expand our operations into microtransit outside of just mobility for all. Because we think, regardless of who the transit agency is that has this territory, whether it's GMT, whether it's anybody else, we would like to be an operator because we're part of the community. This is our community. And there are plenty of examples in Vermont, Grand Isle County, Chittenden County. I'm not familiar with some of the others that are under contract, that have third-party operators as permanent subrecipients of their system. We want to be part of the system in Washington County, and in Orange and Lamoille, if they'll have us. But if the transit agency wants to do that work themselves in Lamoille County, then I'm sure that they will do it themselves, and they'll have doing it under the same administrative structure.
Well, and I do feel like it's how do we meet unmet needs in a new model? I mean, that's where this came from. I get to my job and find out from every service provider, the biggest barrier is transportation. So we're looking at EVs, and we're looking at paid drivers, and we're looking at, yes, complementing and working with the existing transit provider, but to expand the reach to address unmet needs. That's really the goal.
So Senator, for the school contracts we have, Senator, they are paying a portion of our administrative overhead. We're not getting any administrative funding from the agency. The agency, we're getting our hourly rate covering, but any of the funding they're giving us is going to operations. It's eligible to be used for administration. It's just that we're using private funds to do it. So, to this point, I can clearly say that we haven't been using state funds to pay for administration. At some point, we would like to, but
It started on the education fund.
There's a property tax.
But can you tell me what the
May
difference
not wanna
between
go there.
mobility for all and microtransit?
so they're both use an algorithm to determine shared mobility using one vehicle to put as many people on it. So it looks at the totality of rides in on demand in real time and changes the route of the bus or changes the route of the vehicle after it picks up that passenger, just like an Uber.
So what's the difference between mobility all and microtransit?
Microtransit operates in a defined area that it can meet certain pickup times on demand at any time. In Montpelier, that area was 9 miles and it was a 15-minute wait time. It was their goal, and they operated 4 vehicles. So in our service,
When you say our service, do you mean? the
mobility for all,
Okay.
you can you can schedule a ride like you can with volunteers in transit. You can schedule it in advance, or you can call the same day of and ask for a ride, and
You can do that with microtransit too.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the two? You're not
The EV vehicles do not go. The EV vehicles.
We don't compete with them.
We don't compete with them. They have their own service area. So let's
I'm
say
not saying you're competing with them, though. So you're saying
We
you
won't
have
operate in
mobility
it.
for all, but you want to do microtransit. Is there any difference between the two when
yes,
you're doing both?
mobility for all operates where transit doesn't operate, microtransit, and it operates when they don't operate. So there is no microtransit on Saturdays and Sundays. We've been operating some weekend service. When we go public in May, we'll be operating both days, full weekend
Because
service.
microtransit is like a transit. Think of
It operates in the
fixed
same
route, it just
hours.
doesn't do it a fixed route. The mobility for all fills in the gaps. That's what
We're the gap filler.
And there is no microtransit right now.
I know, I
in
understand.
Barre.
Yeah.
Graveyard shifts too, like overnight?
Yes, emergency departures from the hospital. You come in, you go to the emergency room, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're ready to go home, they've treated you, you don't have a ride. Transit isn't operating, there's no way for you to get
But
home.
like, so if you were to transition, so if you use the Gopher branded vehicles,
Yep.
to skip ahead and stuff, would that same vehicle do the mobility for all and microtransit? Or would you have different vehicles, different drivers, different?
I mean, I think
I don't
that's, the mobility for all is gonna be something like, as I understand it, that the agency will look for. I don't know whether we have an answer to whether the Gopher, I mean, I think we would see
What was
it
the
as the
question?
Gopher.
Would
Would
you use
Gopher,
this car for both, for mobility for all?
Yeah.
This would be for mobility for all, and it would be, if we had microtransit operating, it would not operate in the microtransit area unless it was bringing somebody in from outside the area to the hospital, let's say, and there wasn't a convenient transfer point with the current micro system.
Okay.
So the two systems, because we'd be using the same platform, can talk to each other. We can integrate the electric vehicle transfers to the microtransit, and that electric vehicle can go back out to the hinterland to get somebody else to bring them into the
So
microtransit.
Barry had microtransit, it could have a different, and different cars.
Yes, ideally it would have electric, if we were operating it, ideally it would have electric vans.
Because I thought the idea was this mobility for all would expand into microtransit, but you're saying it's not necessarily.
No, I think there's a role for microtransit in smaller towns like Morrisville and Barry and Montpelier. There's definitely a role. And I think what the agency has found it out, and also correct me if I'm wrong, is that it produced better ridership for the dollars invested generally. And because you're taking people where they want to go,
Right.
when they
You
want
could
to
do
go.
that with that car.
We can, and we have been. So as I indicated earlier, 50% of our ridership comes from, Barry City, Barry Town, which would be in this microtransit area. So, that would allow us to go further out where we really want to serve and during the hours. So when GMT shuts down at 6, our operations would start within the microtransit area because microtransit isn't operating. So it's when and where they don't operate.
It's a future thing. It's nothing
Yeah, I understand.
as far as we know. As far as we know.
Okay. What are the key things you want to tell us today? Yeah.
I think we wanted to introduce you to where we're at, where we're going, and have a conversation so you understand. Again, I feel like this is really a demonstration and we're learning a lot. I did want you to meet Amanda because she is carrying an amazing workload and really executing. Amanda, are there things that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think one thing that wasn't mentioned was kind of our broader ambitions of, what we grow into. So currently we're serving, the most vulnerable populations that don't have vehicles. But as we grow and start advertising our service, we're trying to recruit more market rate and people that are willing to pay for rides and really act as a form of public transit serving rural areas and back roads. So, if we're providing rides for someone that doesn't have a vehicle daily to work, we want to recruit their neighbor to get in the car too and kind of act as an form of public transit serving the back roads. So I think that's a broader goal of our service, is to really help Vermont meet its climate goals of reducing single occupancy vehicles and reducing vehicles on the road and sharing rides, and weaving together these different segments of funding, both from the general public, from businesses, from institutions, and then leveraging FTA funds to help subsidize rides for the most vulnerable. So that's really the future sustainability of our company, is braiding different funding sources together. So we're not heavily reliant on government dollars.
I want to just raise one other major vision for me, and it relates to workforce that I know you all hear a lot about. And in the very early phase of our exploration of, is there something we could do to meet unmet needs? Because we try to get people into the workforce, and we work with employers. The Central Vermont Medical Center told us, and this was pre-COVID, they had 200 unfilled positions, mostly for incoming. The Central Vermont Medical Center, the hospital, 200. And when they surveyed the people who either didn't keep the job or retain the job or take the job, transportation access was the #1 problem. So I know you hear this and it worries us all greatly, but that's part of the goal, is can we scale up to provide rides for people who don't have enough to own a car or are not allowed to own and drive a car for whatever reason, to get them into employment, to get them to succeed, to support our large employers. And all of them have expressed an interest in this, and that's why last year we were the second priority in the CEDS, the Community Economic Development goals for our Central Vermont region, was this initiative, because everyone has the same story. Can't get employees, they don't have a car. And right now, with the level of unemployment so low, it's the people we serve who have a lot of barriers to employment, a lot of different kinds of barriers. If we can help them get to recovery and get to work, we're providing rides right now. We provide a school, high school diploma program, the Brook Street High School. Andy, you've been there, for moms who drop out of high school due to their pregnancy. We bring them to our Head Start, where their kiddos, when they are born, can have childcare. We have an education program. Some of those women are in recovery. So we are actually the only way that that mom and their kids can get the mom to recovery and to school and the kids to childcare. It's an incredible, important service that without a ride, that young mom is not in recovery, not getting a high school diploma, and the kids aren't in childcare. And I think you know how many cases like that exist out there. And that's why this is a kind of different service that we're just exploring. And we really appreciate all these good questions, but it's like the level of need and how much transportation plays a role when the families are exiting out of those hotels. We actually get them somewhere. We put their stuff in storage. We help them get to the laundry. Difficult stories that our drivers.
Sure. Sure. Because you just started doing this in May. You haven't had a full year yet.
Correct.
And what is R&J? O&D, or that's now O&D. It is, but I don't know what R&J.
Recovery and job access.
Recovery and job access. So you can see the funding source, mobility for all trips, the first two columns. There's first column's the number of hours, then the number of trips. We're at 1,176. Was this through December, I think?
Yeah, that's through December.
Through December, and we just, we had.
Plus this methadone clinic here
Pardon me?
in Central Vermont.
Methadone clinic.
Where are you taking them, Amanda?
BART, yeah, yes, to the methadone clinic up in Berlin.
Berlin.
Mhm.
And you can see Medicaid we've provided on behalf of GMT through December with 79 trips. They like to use volunteers.
What are unbillable trips?
Trips that are unbillable by the government. So they were denied by GMT because somebody was a Medicaid recipient to a recovery program, and we didn't get them in recovery. We didn't get them in Medicaid. We served them.
And
That's what we fundraise for.
We have a Go For It fund where people can donate money to the Go For It fund to contribute to fund rides that we determine are of an acute need, doctor's appointment, recovery. There is a bureaucratic process by which you get access to these programs, and they haven't satisfied it. We take them, and the Agency of Transportation has been kind enough to fund a mobility manager position for us, which supports GMT. These people
And other transit agencies.
Yes, and other agencies, and so we work with individuals on almost like a case management basis to get them into the public transit system. They can't do it. We get them into it. 3 days later, they're getting their Medicaid, they're getting their O&D, they have access to recovery. So that's another service we provide for GMT. I know I've talked about GMT's capacity, but I haven't talked about their people. Their people and their partnership is excellent for us. We have a great working relationship with. I go to meetings Monday morning or with them and Amanda, or Thursday, and I will always hear GMT say, thank you so much for taking those trips yesterday. We couldn't have done it without you. It is truly a partnership between our two organizations. They provide value to us, we provide value to them, and we're working very closely together.
And I want to say that I do a lot of work to try to raise money for meeting unmet needs through Capstone. But when early on, Amanda was telling me why a person who was exited in June from the hotel. She found a place to live, had no way to get there. We got her there. She was within 3/4 of a mile of the bus route, but she had 2 kids and up a hill, no sidewalk. So she was not eligible for a ride. And I said, Amanda, get her to the job interview. Get her to the grocery store, we'll raise the money. So I make phone calls to people who I know love to donate to things like this. And that's what the Go For It Fund is. We try to have a policy of not saying no. We try to not say no when people come to Capstone's door and they don't have enough heat to get through winter. But our programs can't fund it, so we raise money. And that's what our philosophy is here. We try to provide essential rides that won't be provided by our existing system, but are essential for people's livelihood, and hopefully getting them out of poverty.
But what we don't do is provide rides for people who are eligible for other programs indefinitely, because that disrupts the system. So if somebody's Medicaid eligible and they haven't applied for Medicaid, we help them apply.
We do a lot of case
GPA.
management in that.
We help them apply. We work with GMT. We get them enrolled in the program. We provide them their medical trips.
Right.
You know, they're on a waiting list to see a specialist for their terminal. So we take them, but we do work with the system to get them on board because, as the senator said, there's not enough money to go around. You have to treat every dollar as a precious, scarce resource because we know there's not enough money to fulfill all of the needs in the state in terms of transporting people to where they need to go when they need to go. But the system we're providing now isn't even a bare bones, and we want to try to work towards that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you break? We'll take a break. No,